The Middle East stands at a dangerous crossroad. In Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati races against time, holding urgent calls with Iran, the US, Turkey, Qatar and Pakistan to prevent regional catastrophe. As the US-Israeli strikes hit Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, Trump threatens to obliterate power plants over the Hormuz Strait. And Israel deepens ground operations in Lebanon, while Europe demands war clarity. With the conflict entering the fourth week, global powers watch closely. And will diplomacy prevail, or does escalation spiral beyond control? And we bring you the critical analysis from the heart of this unfolding crisis. And I'm Salma El-Feki. Let's continue our special coverage for the most recent updates concerning this global escalating crisis. The US-Iran conflict is now triggering a political earthquake in Europe. And as energy costs soar, the French elections have turned into a referendum on the war. And this proves the Middle East crisis is reshaping global power. President Trump's military strategy is causing massive economic shocks. European governments are struggling to survive as voters demand cheaper fuel and an end to the fighting. This pressure could soon force a diplomatic breakthrough, and these Western shifts are critical. A change in foreign leadership may finally bring a ceasefire. Stability depends on balancing strategic aims with international survival. And France follows a balanced path in the Strait of Hormuz, choosing diplomacy over military force. And this measured strategy avoids the aggressive US-led mission to focus on cooling down regional tensions. Paris aims to protect global trade while keeping communication open with Tehran. And by acting independently, France seeks to prevent a naval spark from igniting a wider Middle Eastern war. This European moderation is a vital safety valve. It offers a realistic middle ground that preserves maritime security without dragging the region into a total collapse. And Tehran has answered Washington's ultimatum with a chilling threat. Iran now targets the Gulf's lifeblood, water desalination and power plants. And this move shifts the conflict from military sites to essential civilian survival assets. Global markets are trembling as the risk to energy hubs grows, and striking these vital facilities would trigger a humanitarian and economic catastrophe, paralyzing trade and basic human needs across the entire region. This marks a final red line. Regional stability hangs by a thread as the world watches for a total collapse or a desperate diplomatic breakthrough. Arakchi claims marine insurers now fear the war's fire more than Iran itself, and this growing anxiety is paralyzing vital shipping routes. As insurance costs soar, global trade faces a historic crisis that threatens every household. Tehran is urgently pleading with the UN Security Council to halt the aggression. They insist that international intervention is the only way to prevent a total regional collapse. This diplomatic move seeks to build a global shield against further strikes. This is a battle for economic survival, and the conflict has moved from the trenches to the trade routes. Will the world listen? A UK nuclear submarine has reached the Arabian Sea as Iran targets Western bases. Simultaneously, the US Marines prepare for a decisive battle in the Strait of Hormuz. And this massive deployment signals the start of the war's most violent chapter. Strategic hawks like Joe Kent are driving this high-pressure campaign. With Tehran threatening direct hits on the US-UK hubs, the path to a diplomatic exit is rapidly closing. And this maritime clash puts global trade at risk. The struggle for the Gulf is no longer a shadow war, it's a fight for regional survival. And to provide more analysis, joining us from Cairo is Ambassador Mu'taz Ahmadin Khalil, the former permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations in New York, and from London, Mr. Nicholas Williams, the former NATO official. Welcome, gentlemen, to our special coverage, and thank you so much for joining me here today. And I will start off with Ambassador Khalil. Sir, can you tell us how can Egypt's intensive diplomacy prevent the region from spiraling into a total out-of-control state?
Good morning, Salma, and thank you for having me. I believe that there are some intensive diplomatic moves by Egypt right now. But stopping the spiral is a little difficult. I have seen that Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has visited 4 Gulf countries. He was followed by President Sisi just before the end of Ramadan, 2 countries, and the day of Eid al-Fitr, another 2 countries. My understanding that the interpretation of these visits can be put into 2 parallel tracks that do not meet, actually. The first track is a track of mediation regarding trying to finding out an off-ramp for everybody, for both sides. The second track, which is more dangerous, comes within the efforts by the United States to try to form a sort of coalition of the willing to open the Strait of Hormuz. The second track, I do not think that is going to succeed in achieve its objective. It might succeed in forming a coalition, as NATO has recently declared that they have a sort of 22 countries that are going to willingly participate in this effort. But I do not see how can the Strait of Hormuz be opened forcefully. On the second track, the mediation side, there are moves by Egypt, by Turkey. Yesterday, the foreign minister of Turkey has mentioned that he is in permanent contact with his counterparts from Egypt and Pakistan and Europe in order to find an off-ramp. And this is the only way to trying to stop the war. But we should look to the other side. We should look to the United States more because in the mind of President Trump lies whether he's going to continue the war or not, as he is following Israel, of course, from the start, and with his latest ultimatum, I am not very optimistic.
Yeah. And Mr. Williams, would you be able to tell us why is NATO struggling to present a unified strategy as the Iran war enters its 4th week?
Yes, good morning, Salma, and greetings to the distinguished Ambassador Khalil. I think NATO is struggling because NATO is, according to the Europeans, a defensive organization for the purpose of defending their territories in Europe, particularly, from attack. And as Iran is not attacking Europe as a whole, or as it is at war in Europe, then the European allies will be hesitant to form a coalition of the willing in order to intervene dangerously in the Straits of Hormuz.
Ambassador Khalil, Iran urged the UN Security Council to act. Do you think the Council will respond or just remain paralyzed at this point?
Selma, we cannot say that the Council is paralyzed because the Council has taken a decision. He has issued Resolution 2817 on the 11th of March, but condemning Iran and the Iranian attacks on the Gulf and turning a blind eye on the origin of this whole mess, which was Israeli and American aggression. And we have to remember, as you know, that the Council and the United Nations are the reflection of the collective will of the membership. So there is no consensus so far on stopping the war. There is the United States. There are some other countries even that are raising the bar for preconditions to stop the war. So what we can expect is that the Council is not going to take up the issue in the form of the resolution, but it might be discussing it within the regular discussions about the Middle East. There is a monthly discussion about the Middle East. Russia had presented a draft during the meeting on the 11th of March, but it was not adopted. It failed to gather the necessary approval from the members of the Council. But the Security Council and the United Nations, their role is now restricted to just discussing the issue, and they do not have the will or the means to stop the fighting, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Williams, does the deployment of a UK nuclear submarine signal an imminent large-scale naval showdown, do you think?
The position of the British government is a bit contradictory. They initially, and I think still, regard the American and Israeli aggression attack against Iran as illegal. But Iran's response, they consider, the UK government considers disproportionate and random, rendering defensive actions to take out and to destroy missiles as acceptable, even though they believe that the initial aggression was illegal. That's a confusing situation. But the presence of the British nuclear-powered submarine in the northern Arabian Sea is there in case escalation occurs. It's there for intelligence purposes. But the British government is very careful not to provoke or contribute to an escalation.
Yes. Ambassador Khalil, does the attack on Natanz make a nuclear-free Middle East an impossible diplomatic goal, do you think?
Again, this has been impossible for some time now, and not because of Iran, but because Israel is the only country in the region that possesses nuclear weapons since the late 1960s and refuses to join the NPT. This has driven many countries in the region to explore the possibility of acquiring nuclear weapons, and we have clear examples. We had Iraq, Libya, and Syria. And as well, there are other countries that are trying to strengthen and having an expansive, peaceful nuclear program in order to acquire the necessary technology. So this sort of proliferation in the region has a reason, which is the shielding of Israel from any pressure to nuclearly disarm. But again, the attack on Natanz and maybe on Bushehr, the only peaceful nuclear reactor that is at the shores of the Gulf, represents another major threat to the region because it has a potential of radioactive pollution across the Gulf and also in Iran. The bombardment of Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan in June as well caused major damage. I do not foresee any success to the non-proliferation efforts in the region unless the United States and the UK and Russia, the three depository countries of the NPT, take some concrete measures in order to force Israel to subject its nuclear capabilities to the IAEA, which does not look imminent.
Mr. Williams, is Europe's pressure on Trump for asking for war objectives, or we can say legalizing the war, creating a dangerous rift within the Western alliance?
Well, I think there was a dangerous rift already, even before the action of the United States against Iran. But yes, it's an indication that Europeans, particularly those in the EU, are considering their options in terms of this action, in terms of this conflict. Some of them are thinking of joining a naval expedition after the war is over, but they're not thinking of participating in the war. This will result in even more annoyance and anger by President Trump, and action against to weaken NATO. So it is a rift, a significant rift.
Yeah. Ambassador Khalil, could the Iranian threat to desalination plants trigger the region's worst humanitarian disaster? Maybe you can tell us a little bit what the repercussions would be if this were to happen.
There is actually a humanitarian crisis in Iran, and speaking about the region, there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza that nobody talks about. But of course, if Iran is dragged to attack the desalination plant, it would cause a major problem for the Gulf countries, and not only humanitarian, but economic, and also it would kill the model of the Gulf countries as stable hubs for economic activity and investment. But again, it remains to be seen whether Trump will fulfill his threats about hitting Iran very hard beyond the possibility of recovery, or he will tackle out or chicken out as he did in many other issues. Mm-hmm. But if Iran is hit hard, of course, they will start by targeting the oil production facilities and electric production facilities in the Gulf, if they have still have the means to do that, and maybe desalination. But remember that at the beginning of the war, Israel had hit a desalination plant in Iran and tried to accuse the UAE of doing that in order to drag Iran to attack specifically desalination plants in the Gulf, but Iran has shown restraint in this context so far.
Okay. Mr. Williams, how do the soaring energy prices and the French elections reshape the European response to this conflict?
Well, most Europeans are against this conflict. Most Europeans are worried about the rise in the cost of living, the rise in energy prices, and the shortage of petrol at the petrol pumps. And so the French elections are ambiguous, but there is a strong undercurrent of opposition to this war and breaking away of the Atlantic Alliance. They regard the alliance with the United States, many Europeans, as a liability, and particularly under President Trump, who may drag the Europeans into a war which they don't want.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Khalil, why do you think Egypt is linking the Gulf security so decisively to its own national security in these recent calls? If you can tell us why.
This is not a new position. You know that Egypt has participated before in the military effort to liberate Kuwait. And Egypt has shown solidarity with the Gulf countries against the attacks by Iran. But in my opinion, the reason is both economic and political, because the Egyptian economy depends a lot on the stability and prosperity of the Gulf countries. A lot of the Gulf countries trade with the external world, and especially with the north, goes through the Suez Canal. Second, there are many Egyptian workers that live in the Gulf, and they transfer their remittances to the Egyptian economy. There are lots of investment and aid from the Gulf to Egypt. Egypt is a net importer of oil, and the main source of its oil imports come from the Gulf. So there are many reasons that Egypt depends economically on the prosperity and stability of the Gulf. Politically, of course, we are all members of the Arab League, and there is a treaty of mutual defense within the Arab League, and Egypt does fulfill its obligations regarding this treaty. And in addition to all of that, there are very friendly relations between Egypt and the Gulf countries that have been built incrementally since ever. So this is why Egypt considers the Gulf security
crucial. Yeah.
Of course.
Mr. Williams, are the U.S. Marines, do you think, truly prepared for the high stakes and, as they call it, the decisive battle inside the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, it's uncertain. The possibility of an invasion of Karg Island is, I think, acute. It's possibly probable. How the Iranians will react to that, we don't know, but they have many missiles and possibilities in reserve. They're not expending their full power as yet, in case such an action occurs. The problem is, though, President Trump has acute confidence in his own ability and the ability and the power of the American military. And this is a dangerous situation. I don't think he listens to his military advisors, who are probably advising caution, and he doesn't listen to his intelligence sources. He just listens to himself. And that is a dangerous situation, which will lead, in my opinion, and I was in Iraq in 2003, you underestimate the force of patriotic or organized military resistance at your peril.
Ambassador Khalil, how do you think will the transition to a new Iranian leader affect the current secret ceasefire efforts?
In my opinion, Iran has resilient institutions, so it does not matter who is, what is the persona, who is going to lead the country, but they have an ideological regime that keeps track of its main ideas. Speaking about a mediation or secret mediation or open mediation, I think we should again look to the other side and see whether President Trump has an interest in mediation. Does he listen to somebody else? Does he listen only to Israel? Here is the key to stopping the war, and whether the United States and Israel are ready to provide a comprehensive settlement of all the issues of the region, not only Iran, but including the Israeli aggression towards Palestine, towards Gaza, towards Lebanon, towards Syria, towards Iraq as well. This is the key, because if we do not resolve all these issues, there will be remaining reasons for conflict and war, no matter what happens with the current conflict.
Mr. Williams, do you think Israel could actually use nuclear weapons in this conflict? And what might stop them from that brink?
It's difficult to tell. If the Iranians have enough missiles and air power to cause substantial damage to Israel, then the use of nuclear weapons is possible. I think it's improbable. I think even the Americans, even President Trump, would prevent them from doing that. But it is possible. But I think the Israelis are confident, with the backing of the United States, that this war is going their way, and Iran is being damaged substantially, to the point that it couldn't recover militarily for a number of years. And that may be what satisfies Trump and satisfies the Israelis.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Khalil, do you think Trump's peace talks that are happening via Steve Witkoff a real hope for Tehran, or just a tactical pause?
I consider that the peace talks led by Witkoff and his buddy Kushner are rather a joke than a hope, because they have showed utter failure in all their endeavors and their trademark achievement in Gaza. Look at where is Gaza now. Nobody speaks about Gaza, and we are frozen in the so-called first phase of the agreement. Look at their efforts in Ukraine, and I'm sure Professor Williams will agree with me. Nothing has been achieved. So I do not count on that. And again, if there is enough pressure from the Gulf countries who have substantive investments in the US and other countries like Turkey and Europe as well, and maybe NATO, I see that the head of NATO, Mr. Rutte, is too much leaning to placate Trump rather than putting pressure on him. But if there is enough pressure on Trump, he will try to stop the war or slow down. But if all parties try to placate him, he would push further, and this is the danger. But I do not count on Witkoff or Kushner. They are real estate brokers, and they are applying their brokers and used car salesman tactics in international relations, while international relations do count on trust and incremental relations, not on a hit and run one-time deal with different customers.
Mm-hmm. And as we can see on the screen at the moment right now, we can see the Israeli attacks that are just actually happening right now on southern Iran, and they're just happening as we are speaking. But let me ask you, Mr. Williams, can you tell us a little bit how China and Russia are responding to this US-Israeli war on Iran now?
Yes, first of all, I agree with the distinguished Ambassador Khalil that Kushner and is the Laurel and Hardy of diplomatic. Kushner and Witkoff are the Laurel and Hardy of international diplomacy. They're a joke, as he says. But Iran has the political backing of Russia and China. Of course, they won't get involved in this war, but directly. But China is waiting patiently. Russia knows that Trump is in trouble, so they will offer a compromise, solutions to the war, but they're waiting for after the war in terms of the Gulf countries considering hedging their bets, hedging their diplomacy in favor of collective security for the Gulf, as Russia proposes and as Russia has expended significant diplomatic capital on. So I think the balance of power is changing towards, after the war, towards China, Iran, and Russia in terms of balance of power and diplomacy.
And that was Mr. Nicholas Williams, the former NATO official. And with us as well was Ambassador Mu'taz Ahmadin Khalid, the former permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations in New York. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your special insights and your valuable discussion. From Cairo to the Gulf, diplomacy races against destruction, and Egypt calls Europe's pressure, Iran's threats. Each hour brings the region closer to collapse or a breakthrough. And as submarines patrol Hormuz and power plants burn, one question remains: will wisdom prevail before the point of no return? The world watches, and we continue monitoring, and we remain committed to bringing you every development in this critical timing.